Hey there. In today's episode, we're going to turn this pile of parts into this. So stick around and see how I do that. Alright, so in today's episode, we are going to work on step 1, which is going to be building up the engine. I might do step 1 and 2. Step 2 is just finishing off the bevel drives and the carbs. So I'll probably incorporate that. So by the end of this episode, we should have more or less the finished engine, cylinder block, crankcase, heads, carbs, everything on there. So yeah, stick around. Let's see how we go with that. So this one's got quite a bit of parts that are on little frets or whatnot. So a little bit of, I don't know if you want to call it prep work, but a little bit of cleanup needed. So I use, I think these are Tamiya, these ones, but they're for metal and plastic. So I find them quite nice for cleaning up the white metal. I'll even use the other nippers, the finer ones on white metal on smaller bits. They work fine. I'll use my older pair. But yeah, just get everything clipped off. I'm not going to show you the whole building here. I just basically show you a bit of the tools that I use, how I deal with this kind of stuff. So those cutters are pretty good. They're flush cut. I got some smaller ones. These ones here work well. These are just for plastic. These are the Mr. Hobby ones, but they work good on the white metal, and it doesn't really hurt them. So stuff like this, the way these pour blocks are, there's a little nub left. So I just need some good fine ones to trim that off, and then I'll just have to file that and give it a quick sand, and they'll be good. So yeah, most of the tools are, it's a nice thing about white metal. It's really not much different than dealing with plastic. So it's soft enough that most of your tools will work just fine on it. Most of the sanders, cutters, obviously you could use different glue, but other than that, your tools are good. So anyways, I'm going to get all these cleaned up, and I'll just give all the parts a bit of a prep, take them over to the paint booth, give everything a prime, I think. I'm not sure. We'll see what I come back with. I was just thinking I might actually assemble these heads as one assembly and then paint them. I'll give them a dry fit first to see what that's going to be like, but that might be the strategy on this. We'll see. So, anyways, let me get a bit more of this done, and I'll check in with you later. Hey, I just want to do a quick check-in. I've been working on getting parts cleaned up here, and I just wanted to, maybe explain my process a little bit for those that haven't watched any of my other videos. So, as far as cleaning up parts, more or less the same tools you'd use for a plastic bottle. So, with the exception, like sometimes I'll bust out a fairly coarse file to get rid of, big imperfections on the part or to flatten something out. Other than that, you can use mostly the same tools for this sanders, whatnot. They all work just fine with the white metal. I usually keep a separate set of stuff. This isn't everything that I'd potentially use. This is the ones I've been using today. I keep them in a separate tub, and I don't use them on plastic after I've used them on white metal, just because it makes a mess. And speaking of that, making a mess, I put a piece of, this is like heavy, like art paper that you get in those big, 24-inch workbooks. So it's this heavier paper that's pretty cheap. I just throw that down just to minimize the amount of mess on everything else, because when you're sanding and filing the white metal, it makes a mess, and it'll get your cutting mats, it'll stain them. You can get it out eventually, but it takes a bit to get them cleaned up. So anyways, I just do that, a little bit of paper down just to contain the mess a little bit. And here's all my parts, and I've kind of organized. I like this tray. I can't remember where I got it. I think I got it at the dollar store. But I think it's like a sushi tray or something like that, just cheap plastic. But I find this works good, because what I do is I'll put all the parts that I want to work on for whatever step. So in this case, this is step 1 and 2 that I got going on here. I'll stick them all, in the beginning in one of the compartments. And then as I work through cleaning and prepping them, I sort of start shifting them down. So everything here has been, I kind of do a multi-step process. I don't know if it's the most efficient. It just works best in my mind. Is I'll go through deburr, clean up the seams, file off, flatten anything, do all the rough work. I do that to all the parts, and that's what I got here, and I got sitting here. And then depending on then I go into the sort of the dry fitting of everything, and that starts getting into drilling holes and getting all that. So I do all the rough work with the sanding, filing. That creates the bulk of the mess. And then I sort of clean everything up, and then I switch over to the next phase, which is going to be dry fitting and drilling holes. And then I just start shifting bins. So like these ones are all done. They're all cleaned up. All the holes have been cleaned up. I didn't really need to do dry fitting for the holes. That will come later. So yeah, once I get these all cleaned up, get all the holes drilled, everything's dry fitted, then I actually throw them in this tub, and I go and I wash everything in soap and water. And then I got my little drying tray here and let everything dry out. And it's on to assemble sub-assemblies that are all going to be painted the same color, and just organize all my parts for priming and painting. So that's what I'm doing, and that's where I'm sort of at right now. I did put the cases together, because I kind of need them to dry assemble and test fit the cylinder heads, which is all this is the cylinder heads. One of the cylinder heads builds up on the block here, on the casing over this standoff, and it stacks vertically, I guess. This one, you don't do that. You build it separately, and then it slides on. So it's kind of sideways, this one, the way it builds up, but same principle though. And then they'll fit on, because the fins go the opposite direction on this head. Because the way the engine is orientated, you want the airflow into the fins, so I think that's why they did it this way. But anyways, so that's why I put the cases together, so that will make building up this head a little easier. I'm going to probably deviate from the instructions a little bit. They kind of have you build it up on this standoff, which I'll probably do, but I won't attach it permanently to the crankcase quite yet. Like I'll use this as the jig, essentially, as an assembly jig. Build up the head, but not have it attached to this standoff, so I can take it off and paint it separately. But I am going to build up the two heads unpainted and then paint them. It'll make it a little tricky getting into the deep recesses of the fins, but honestly, if you miss a bit of paint, you don't get some of it covered. The color of the metal is close enough, so you'll never notice. You just throw a bit of a wash in there and it'll be fine. But I want to do that so that I can vary the tones of the various silvers, and I'll get into that when I show you the painting. So anyways, just I wanted to share that with you. So I'm going to carry on drilling 5 million holes, and I'll check in with you probably after I get a bit of sub-assemblies done and before I go into paint, and then we'll go from there. So, one thing I was going to say was drilling. I use this one. I'm not saying it's the best thing out there. It's actually got a few drawbacks. What I really like about this is, it's simple, it's small and light, so it fits in your hand well. It's battery operated. It takes 2 AAAs. It doesn't have a ton of torque, but it's pretty good for drilling, especially if your drill bits are sharp. It works just fine for drilling. Sometimes it'll grab and bite and stall out, which is a bit of a pain. But for the most part, it works quite good, especially if I'm just doing a bunch of pilot holes and then I'm going to come back and expand them bigger. Typically when I do that, when I go with the bigger hole, I'll just do them by hand. But for doing my pilot holes, this thing it speeds it up and it lessens the chance of breaking a drill bit because it gets a hole drilled quickly. Whereas drilling them by hand with a pin vise, because you're, working it, there's more of a chance to go crooked and break it. Whereas this, or whatever, rotary tool, little drill in general, lessens the chance of breaking drill bits, which I know seems counterintuitive, but it is. Big drawback of this thing is it only fits 2.35 millimeter shank bits. So Mr. Hobby has their own line of bits, and they come in, you can see there, I think, 0.5, 0.8, 1 mil, 1.2, 1.4, and 1.6. And that's it. That's all you can get from Mr. Hobby. And those, I think it's 2 sets you got to buy. It's like you get a set of 3, the small ones and then the big ones. And they're quite expensive. So finding alternative supply of bits is what you need to do here. And I think Proxxon, I don't know if they have all these sizes. I think they actually, I can't remember if their range of drill bits are bigger or smaller, but they have a range of fixed shank, so which are the same, 2.35 mil drill bits, and they're considerably cheaper. I can't remember exactly, don't quote me on this, but like the set of 3 of the little ones from Mr. Hobby is like $35. And you can get 3.5 drill bits, like a set of 3 from Proxxon for like $10. So considerably cheaper to get them from Proxxon. But anyway, so they work in this tool, but that's limited availability of tools that fit in this thing, which is unfortunate that it's got this fixed collet system on it. That's not, you can't change this collet out for anything else. It just is what it is. It's the collet is the output of the motor. So anyways, that's what I used for this. Usually, you got the Proxxon, of course, as well, which is considerably bigger and corded, as you can see. So it's a little awkward. Usually I hang the cord up. They're not very long, though. You can't really see what I'm doing. But so it has a bit of slack, but that's a bit of a pain. The benefits of the Proxxon is variable speed. I got a foot switch. You can control speed here. Plus I got the big power supply down here, which you can control the speed on as well. So this is super handy for drilling. I got tape on here because I use it for polishing sometimes. So the knurling on here, I don't want that to obviously mar a finished surface. So this little bit of insurance, it kind of works. So I got that one. It works good. I like it for bigger sort of jobs. That's where it's handy. Plus I got the little drill press for it, so that's really good. Another alternative is this guy. It's the Dremel Micro, which is cordless. It's got a chuck on it, a 3-jaw chuck, which is nice. I think I bought the 3-jaw chuck separately, but it's cheap. And this isn't very expensive. And it works really well. The only drawback on this one is, you can set the speeds. It's not, 100% variable, but it's got different speed settings. But, which is great. But the problem with this thing, I find, is it always starts at the same level, and then you gotta turn it down to wherever you want. So if you shut it off, turn it back on, it always starts at 15,000. So that's a bit of a pain, especially when you're doing a lot of repetitive things and, and things that you need to constantly turn off and turn on the tool for. Like if you're polishing with this, it sucks because of that. Because, as soon as you turn on, the thing's going way too fast, and if you got any polish on your polishing pad, it flings it everywhere. So not the best for that, but it's still a super solid, fine rotary tool that's cordless, so that's good. It's a decent size. It's quite small in the hand, so it's easy to use. I like actually the grip on the end of this one better than all of the other ones. It's a little bit heavier actually than the Proxon because it's got a battery. So it's a little bit fatter, but it's got a nicer grip. I find that it gives you something for your fingers to butt up against, so that's nice. But this one is really nice. I'd say this is definitely my favorite rotary tool, except for the cord. And then this guy, you might see these in the hobby shop somewhere. It's a okay little rotary tool. It's got variable speed control, so you set the speed, you turn it on and set the speed, and then you got the on-off switch right there. So turn down, and it spins relatively slow. But what I find with this is this chuck is not the most concentric chuck in the world. You can get it to spin small blade drills fairly on point, but 9 times out of 10, it's got so much run out in it that you cannot drill a hole accurately with this thing. So it gets, relegated to doing non-precision work. But it's decent. I use it for polishing a lot. I put a polishing pad on here and I use it for that. So it's nice. It doesn't have a ton of torque either, which is good for polishing, so that you're not, if you're putting too much pressure on it, you'll physically hear the thing slow down, so you're putting too much pressure on. So that's kind of nice for that. So anyways, I just thought I'd share some of the things I utilize and different options out there, and I'm going to carry on with this, so I'll talk to you in a bit. All right, so there we go. I've got everything cleaned up, everything test fitted, built up some sub-assemblies. I got all these parts up here. They're all been test fitted for the most part. Obviously the bolts and stuff, I don't test fit those. I've got all the holes drilled for them, so they just might need to be opened up a little bit, and I usually do. Well, I do that after I paint the assembly and get it assembled, and then I'll get those fit. So anyways, the engine itself is this dry fit, as you can see. Hopefully this is focusing well. It's like I say, it's just dry fit right now. It was a little bit to get here from all the parts, that's for sure. The cylinder heads and cylinders are built. Crankcases are together, you saw that. So let's just get this off the stand, talk about it a little bit. So I guess first I'll start taking a few pieces off. These side covers all need to be polished, so I consider that finishing work. So obviously I fit and make sure all the surfaces are flat first, get all that done, then I go and polish them. So that's part of the paint stage, so to speak. So they're ready to go. These little bevel drive covers will get polished as well. So that's the engine here. Now let's just get that off of there. And let's zoom in a little bit. So here's the engine all ready to go. Yeah, it's looking pretty good. Let's see if I can show you this side without everything falling off. It's probably going to. So yeah, let's talk about those cylinders. Let's get that piece off of there. So right now I just have the bevel drives. I'm going to paint everything first before I put those on. So they're just sitting there. Both of those. But yeah, the cylinders are a bit of an adventure, especially the rear cylinder, the vertical one. So there's the block, and for the keen-eyed among you that were observant before, you will notice that. Sorry, I'm just trying to get everything out of the frame so it helps with focusing. That this sort of post spigot has been cut down. This one is gone in its entirety. There's 4 brass rods sitting there, so just look at the instructions. You can see that the motor had this big post that each individual fins of the cylinder and the head built up around. This post, they don't build up around that. You build it separately, and then it fits on. So the square one, the front one first. Once everything's built up, this was too long. So that was fairly easy to fix, obviously. Just cut it down shorter. Identifying that was the actual issue was a bit of not really a challenge, but at first I was thinking that it was this surface wasn't flat and it was causing it to sort of sit up a bit and rock. But it was actually, so I flattened all that out, which it needed to anyways, but it was actually hanging up on the end of this. So yeah, I got that squared up, I got this cut off, and then I dry assembled it, and I found out that the bevel drive shaft tube was actually too short, and it was flopping around. It would actually fall out. So then I had to actually shorten this by sanding it down flat. So I took, I don't know, maybe 1/2 mil off the end of that, which cleaned it up really well, and it looks really good now. So it fits square and tight to the block when it slides on. So yeah, that was a little bit of a challenge. Not bad though, and it built up. I don't know if you remember, these are all individual fin stacks. So this is, each one of these fins represents a part that built up flat and then turns into the cylinder block and the head. So anyways, it turned out good. It was a little fiddly to build, but worked out in the end. So that was that one. This one was the one that was the most problematic, getting it built. So again, this is, I don't know, there's 14 pieces that builds up, the individual fins, and they all just stack up on. The way they had you build it was, you build it all onto the spigot of the engine. It's on the crankcase. You just keep stacking it on. Well, great in theory, but getting them all down and tight would have been problematic. So I always wanted to build this so this was a complete unit and removable. I wanted to do that so that I could paint this slightly different tone than the block or the crankcase. So anyways, I was trying to figure out how to do that. I test fit it all. And in doing so, I discovered that, when these are all on there, you can see here this top one sits on top of the spigot, right? It sits flat on this. This pin goes through the hole that's in the middle of this. So all of these ones go over the spigot, and then the top one's like a capstone, so to speak. It sits on top. So, you know, the stack-up dimension of all of these should be exactly the same as this, so that this can sit on top of that. Well, it wasn't. You know, once you got the 13th fin on, there was still almost 1.5 millimeters of this spigot sticking out. So either the spigot's too long or these are too thin. So that's a problem. So I had a couple choices. I could just cut the top off of this. Well, a couple solutions was trim this spigot off, or build little shims that go in between each one of these fins to expand it out about 1.5 millimeters, which would be about a 0.1 millimeter shim that you'd have to do for each one of them. That would give you just about the right dimension, which would have been a major pain in the ass because you'd have to cut them to be this. You can see the shape of this, how it, you know, follows that. Each one of those has this base, so you need to build a shim that's that shape, and then get it glued on there, trim, because you can see them in there. It's kind of hard. You can't really see it on the camera, but you can see it in there. You can see through it if there's light from behind. So that would have been tricky at best, you know, almost impossible, I would say, to do it cleanly. So the other option is then to trim this post, this spigot off of the, you know, trim the top of it off, and then put a new post on. But because I wanted to build this like this, to have this assembly, I elected just to cut it off the block and then trim it to the right length, and I used that. That's it sitting inside there. That's it there. So then I could build this all up on it, clamp this together nice and tight so it compressed everything together and squared it all up, and then just got in there and glued each one together. So that's what I ended up doing. And it worked out really well. They give you, these are the bolts here, they give you these big long white metal bolts which have a nut and bolt detail, or nut and stud detail on the end of them. These are what you're supposed to put through here, right into the crankcase. But the white metal's not really, well, it's not strong, right? So I didn't want to use those to build this up over, because it could potentially move. So I used the pins, and then I just put the pins in the block, and that will, or in the crankcase, and those will glue it over, and then just some epoxy at the base, and it'll be plenty of strong. Like, this is not going anywhere just on those pins, and it fits in there nice and tight. You can see I'll just, when I put it together, I'll just clamp it like this with some epoxy in there, let it set up, and it'll be more than strong enough. I was kind of considering putting a little standoff on here. It would go through and index in there, but I don't think it's necessary. So that was that. But what it did is it lowered this cylinder down a little bit. So then I had to just bore out this, which is the receiver for the bevel drive shaft, the tube for the drive shaft, to just counterbore that, so just so it would sit in a little bit farther. So yeah, and now it all fits really well, and I think, and should go together relatively painless once I get everything painted. So yeah, that's kind of where we're at with this guy. It's more or less ready for paint. So that will all just fit together really nice now. It'll be super tight and accurate. Yeah, so getting all those fins straight, and even was a little bit of work, to say the least. So yeah, it's a great method of sort of doing fin cylinders with having each building it up in layers. But man, does it create a lot of work, especially on something like this, because there's nothing that really indexes each part to each other. It's just all built up either over the the pin or the spigot or whatever it was cast on here, and the bolt holes. That's what lines it up. But there's nothing positive to keep it really from turning and to getting them perfectly indexed to each other. So that was tricky getting all that. That's where it was good having this off. And then I could clamp this, and it's all dry, and then I had the brass pins in here just to keep it more or less where it's supposed to go, but there's enough slop that they could still turn a little bit, so then you could just get them indexed just right so that they're all the corners are lined up. It was mainly what I was looking at, the four corners, so that they're not clocked differently. And you can feel that with your fingers. So that made that really easy, actually. And then, it's clamped in there. And once I got everything good, I just glued it, and then I can go through and basically comb the, I used this and just basically combed all the gaps to straighten everything out and get them even. And then I went in and filed everything and sanded and so forth. So that was the work involved in doing this. It probably took me to get this to the stage it is and sanding everything, and there's quite a bit of sanding needed on these castings here. They weren't terrible, but they weren't super great. But I've probably got, 8 hours into this so far, just to get to this stage here, which isn't bad. We've burned through quite a bit of parts already on the kit. So that's got all the parts cleaned up, like I say, for step one, all of step one and step two. I was looking through the instructions here. I was thinking next thing I was going to do in this video, or for this video, was to go into paint and get the engine complete. But I'm not sure. I'm not sure how I want to present this. If I want to present it chronologically as the build steps, or if I'm going to present, how I'm actually doing the kit, because they'll probably deviate a little bit, because I don't. If you build the model the way they want you to build it, you need to build the chain now. So there's that. The wheels, well, we don't really need them for quite some time, so you don't really need to build them right then. So, if we look here, I know there's glare on this, I'm sorry. I thought these lights would actually help with this, but they don't. They have you build the frame with the swing arm in with the chain captured. Now I figure I'm just going to build the chain and leave it open and build the frame up and everything, and then put the chain in and close it after the frame's all done, because working on all this with that chain flopping around seems rather an invitation for disaster. So I'm not going to do that. I'm going to try leaving the chain open and closing it after the fact. But now I'm thinking of, instead of going to paint with this, is I kind of want to get the frame on the go so that I can test fit the engine into the frame before I finalize the build on the frame, and before I got a bunch of paint on the engine so it doesn't get scratched up from test fitting. So I'm probably going to skip forward right now, get the frame test and and assemble to a certain degree. I also want to build the frame and then paint it afterwards. And I'd like to leave the swing arm out to paint them separately. So I've got to try to work out how that's going to work, because they have you build it here, as you can see, capturing the swing arm in there. So I got to see if I can get it in after the fact. I'm sure I could. We'll see, though. I need to work that out. So I might skip ahead to that. So I'm not sure. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to call it a day on this episode. I think we've done a lot. I kind of wanted to have something finished and painted to sort of close off each episode, but I know these beginning ones, that's kind of hard to do at the beginning of a project, because especially these kind of projects, because you really need to think ahead on these ones. You can't really build them step by step and 100% completion. You kind of need to test fit everything before you commit too far down on anything, really. So I think that's what we're going to do. I'm going to present this, I think, as I organically build it. So with that said, I'm going to leave this episode here, and we will see you in the next episode, which, again, I'm not quite sure yet, but more than likely it'll be starting to build the frame. So until then, thanks for watching. I really appreciate everybody that's watched and subscribed to my videos or my channel. So I hope you're enjoying this. Until next time, we'll see you later. Take care. Bye-bye.